However, you may be listening, wherever you may be listening. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of the All Cardinals podcast. My name is Donnie, Druin, joined by my co-host Andrew Harbaugh. Before we even dive into all the wonderful things we're going to talk about today, make sure to comment, like, subscribe to the YouTube page. Follow me on Twitter at Donnie Druin. Follow Andrew on Twitter at Andrew Harbaugh _ Andrew, completely related and even switching complete sports to another continent. In about 3 hours, my Barcelona boys are going to play in the Europa League second leg against Manchester United. That has consumed my mind all day. I'm very, very nervous. Your Man City boys played, I believe, yesterday against RB Leipzig, managed to pull out a much-needed win. How are you?
We got a draw is what we got. We didn't win.
No, you drew?
Yep, gave a late equalizer.
I got to watch the highlights of that. I had to go to a meeting, but they were up 1-0. Yes. Whenever I turned it off, so I just assumed they won.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly most games I don't have to tune in for because I just assume, oh, hey, it's going to be a Holland hat trick. We're going to win 4-1, and Pep's still not going to be happy about anything going on in his life. But no, Man U's playing interesting. Like after the years of comedy of watching them struggle, I feel like Sancho and them have finally figured things out, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them. I saw somebody on Twitter said that his goal in that possession the other day was going to be the start of what everyone remembers as the Ten Hag era for Man U. And I'm such a casual with soccer recently because I'm doing so much of this work. I was like, he's only been there. It just turned a year, but like he's had a quick turnaround. He was at what was it, Ajax before or Lions?
Ajax,
one of those. Yeah. And he did great there. So I was like, this might be them for Man U. I'm always hard cold on Pep. You know how I am. It's kind of like how I would like some defense every once in a while. But again, I also have a bet on Liverpool to win the Champions League. So I also need I just know my team's going to choke. So
yeah, as a Barca fan, I was happy the first 15 minutes of that 2-0 lead, and then at the end of the match when it was 5-2 in favor of Real Madrid, it definitely was not good times here in the Druin household. But never can count Liverpool out. Hopefully, you can never count out a strong defensive acumen at number 3 for the Arizona Cardinals, and we're just going to get right into it. I feel like for so long, this is going to continue until we actually hear the pick. If the Cardinals were to stay at number 3, because there's been a lot of talks about them potentially moving back as well, but if they were to stay at number 3, Jalen Carter, Will Anderson. Basically, the only two options the Cardinals should entertain that Cardinals fans would be happy with, and two very, very good options. Nonetheless, I think the Cardinals would be very, very happy with either of the two, and then bring them to the desert. But a new option has entered the ring at the potential number 3 pick. Daniel Jeremiah, an NFL insider over at NFL.com, had Texas Tech edge Tyree Wilson going to the Cardinals at pick number 3. Jalen Carter went number 1, Bryce Young went number 2, and Wilson went number 3. For those curious, Will Anderson, who obviously was not picked at number 3, fell all the way to the Seattle Seahawks at number 5. So, just to give Cardinals fans an idea, you don't get Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. You pick somebody else instead. And Will Anderson goes to a divisional rival who you are going to see twice a year and you don't exactly like. We were talking a little bit off air, and you mentioned this in an article, which we'll bring up a little bit later, Andrew. But Daniel Jeremiah is a very, very well-respected person within our field. He has a lot of connections. He knows a lot of people. He talks a lot to a lot of people. And like you had previously brought up in the article, he's a scout. He's a former scout. So he has a pretty good idea of where things start to kind of shift and mold, right? I believe he was one of the very first people last year to start putting Travon Walker like top 5, right? Before that was even considered to be a thing. Are we seeing the same kind of movement here with Tyree Wilson?
Maybe. It's hard to say. Like you brought up how there's 2 people that do mocks that, I mean, honestly, I love mock drafts. If I see one, I don't click on it unless it's Daniel Jeremiah or Dane Brugler from The Athletic, because both of them mock with the information they receive from people they know within different teams and offices. Everybody else really just kind of with all due respect to everybody else, just kind of throws darts. But that's also the fun part of doing mocks, myself included, same way. But to the point with what Daniel Jeremiah's done, he has a history of usually there's 2 or 3 people every year that nobody's thinking is going to go as high as they're going to go. And he's the first person to clue them in. And we've had constant discussions to the point of boredom almost of, oh, it's going to be Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. I have not done, until this came out, did not do much work on Tyree Wilson because I've been seeing him mocked to 5 at Seattle, ironically. But as he makes the point here, and this is what I wrote about in my article, combination of size, length, and production has teams very intrigued. And that's the one thing that's been knocked on Anderson is he's a leaner edge guy. He's, I believe, listed at 230. I'm sure he's on a heavy diet of peanut butter and jellies leading up to the combine. Him and Bryce Young probably have eating competitions every night.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be the real interesting thing is what comes out of next week in Indy is the measurables for him, I think, is really going to know whether or not this mock is future, telling what the future is going to be, or if it's going to be a, oh, hey, I just wanted to scare everybody type of approach.
Yeah, certainly interesting. And it's always fun because this happens every cycle. And I think you already alluded to this is, people are mocked way too high and people are mocked way too low. And this is even before we get to Indianapolis at the NFL Combine. You talk about measurables, and schools are known to kind of stretch some numbers a little bit here and there to kind of help their guys out in the profile. Almost same with the Senior Bowl, even though they actually do like legitimate measurements. At Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, you're not hiding. If you are 3 inches and you're listed height on the school website, everybody and their mom is going to know it once you get off that stage, right? I mean, like the lights are the brightest there. They're going to see everything you could possibly do from a physical and a mental standpoint. And it just feels like Wilson might be one of those risers. And I guess we can kind of get into this topic now. It's just your own personal opinion before we dive deeper into it. Would you be surprised at this point in the offseason if Wilson was seriously in play at number 3?
At number 3, yes. In the Cardinals' plans, it would not shock me. That's something, and that's the other part too. It's tough. It's the first year with a new front office with Ozenfort. You don't really know. You can look at what Tennessee did, but John Robinson was ultimately the GM there, so he's the one who's going to be credited with the picks. And you can look at, and I have it bookmarked. I'll have to share it again. Somebody took the time and laid out a fantastic chart. He even put in the tweet, whoever wants to use this can use this. And it lays out all the different picks. And Ozenfort, during his tenure at Tennessee, they really didn't focus on one position more than the other. But that being said, Tennessee always had really interesting picks. Tennessee always took chances on guys that were maybe on an uptick versus kind of already being there in the draft. Good example, Jeffrey Simmons a couple years ago. They got out of Mississippi State who fell because of, I think it was the fight video at the McDonald's or whatever it was. I can't remember. Ultimately, Simmons has been a fantastic pick for Tennessee, one of the best defensive linemen in the league. So he has a history of being in a front office that takes chances on guys who have measurables and going from there. Tyree Wilson's in that same mold. And I will say my first initial reaction to this was, what the hell are we doing? We're overthinking everything all over again. Because I work for 33rd team, and all I've heard at 33rd team is how Will Anderson, they're not very high on Will Anderson. And I've thought my bosses are overthinking this. But now it's like, well, if other people's bosses are outside the building thinking about it, it might make a little bit more sense. So it's something that initially I was very apprehensive about. I let it digest, and then I wrote the article after doing some work on them, and I am more open to it than I initially was.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, I think you kind of summed it up perfectly. now's the time to really overthink things. And, it's kind of just that part of the cycle where we haven't really gotten to see the guys test in Indianapolis yet. It's kind of that like post Senior Bowl, pre-combine period of not a whole lot going on. So now is really the time to kind of throw stuff out a wall and see if it sticks, right? I'm not saying Daniel Jeremiah is doing that, but nonetheless, it is a time to really break down prospects because nobody's perfect, right? Like there has to be something wrong with each guy to kind of, put in the pros and cons list. I believe in the article, which we'll touch on here in a second, the cons list is his inconsistency was one of them, right?
Yeah. So like when he's on and he's dominating guys, he will let you know about it through his play, through his emotions, through his actions. Like when there's the highs are high and the lows are low with him. So, but then there's times where he's able to get schemed out by an offensive line or blocked out or whatever, and he just disappear at times. Physically, he's always there. Like you watch film, and you can see him. It reminds me a lot of, and this is not a player comp by any means, but like as somebody that watches a lot of Cleveland Browns football, I can always tell who Myles Garrett is on the line. Tyree Wilson is built the same way. Very physically imposing. He's listed at 6'6", 275, I think. And it's not even like there's no chubbiness to that 275. It's like a Myles Garrett 275. So it's one of those things where it's kind of like how when you were younger and you played a basketball team and there was a really tall kid and you're like, this is going to suck. But then it turns out like, oh, hey, if we do the right things, we can take him out of the offense.
Yeah.
Tyree Wilson's that really tall kid in 6th grade where he's either going to just dominate everybody or it's going to be a long day for him. And I think that's something that a coaching staff in the NFL ultimately will have to work with. And that's something, believe me, there are worse problems to work with for a prospect, like for an edge rusher especially. Prime example, and I was looking at sizes before this too, because we were going to look at Will Anderson. The leanest leading sack play in the top 5 sacker. Let's try this again. In the NFL this past year, when you look at the sacks, the top 5 players with the most of them this year, the leanest one was Hassan Reddick, who took the longest to figure out, had to get schemed the right way, coached up the right way. Who did that? Our new head coach, I was saying Rich Gannon. I'm going to do that a lot in Gannon. But I think Wilson would be very interesting with him and his new defensive coordinator that he young staff there as well. So I think it's going to be okay. That being said, you're going to be in the building that night. I think it will be very much, and I made a fun comparison in the article. It's going to be one that fans probably won't be very happy with. But I think once the season rolls around and he develops, it might be like, okay, we're not too far off.
I was going to say, yeah, because when you talk about, I'll ask you this. If both Anderson and Wilson are on the board there at number 3, and there are serious comparisons to both within the Cardinals war room as to who to take, is it fair to say that Wilson is more of the project?
I would say, like, if you're looking for an immediate impact, like, I think Anderson comes in, gets you 10 plus sacks as a rookie.
Ooh, sign me up.
Which is hard to pass up.
Yeah, that's tough. But the knock on Anderson, I think you already touched on it, is his size, right?
Yes, and that's going to be the part where, and that's the other thing too, is it's a double-edged sword because, what are you going to do with NFL-sized linemen? He plays in the SEC. Yeah. All these guys are already going to be NFL-sized offensive linemen.
I was going to say, so Wilson, sorry to keep interrupting you. Wilson is the more physically imposing prospect, right? But when it was either you or somebody else that had written, he struggles to, like, whenever he played against big offensive linemen, he struggled, and he's going to be playing against big offensive linemen every week on Sunday.
Yeah, that was for my thing. Because what I was saying, making what that point is, he doesn't have the arsenal of pass rushing moves to really take advantage of guys' leverage and their blocking and their stances and so on. That's something he needs to develop. Like right now, he's relying on, I'm in the Big 12. I'm bigger and faster than most of these guys. They're not used to playing against good defense. No offense to anybody in the Big 12. There are good prospects in there, obviously. But the difference between the two, like, I don't know what Wilson would be like if he were in the SEC. Like, would we be talking about him the same way that we talk about B.J. Ojulari out of LSU? He's firmly in that second round conversation. And he's got the physical traits and everything. That's the part I don't know. And just to finish my thought too, with how I said Anderson would probably come in and get 10 as a rookie, I think Wilson would be somebody you'd probably get like 5 or 7 out of, which is not bad, but it's also, if you're going to take him third overall, you'd like a little bit more of an impact. It's just, there's a lot to develop with him. And it's if a coaching staff can do it, and I think the staff can, is where you're like 2-3 years down the road when you're hopefully winning a Super Bowl, you're like, this was the pick that started it all versus this is the pick that started a whole new hiring cycle 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because I feel like so much with the modern NFL where, guys are expected to come in and contribute greatly right away, right off the bat from the rookie season. And, people are so quick to label somebody a bust. And, if they don't figure it out the first, second year, they're kind of like a lost cause from there. Drafts in like Super Bowls, that they're not won immediately the year following with draft, but more so kind of like down the road, right? I mean, you get those draft classes in, you let them develop, you let them, mold to whatever system you're trying to run, and then you kind of go from there. If Tyree Wilson is the pick for the Cardinals, whether at number 3 or number 6 or number 7, and he doesn't pan out right away, he's not a lost cause, right? I mean, there's so much time in order for him to develop. But on the other side of the token, how many times have we seen a big, physically imposing guy, and there's this thought process where, okay, all we need to do is kind of get him to hone in on X, Y, and Z, and he'll be great, and that just hasn't happened.
Yeah, and I think I was pulling this up as a fine example. So if you're a Cardinals fan, and I'm just going to compare 2 people that were in the same class, if you got 15 games out of your pick and you got 1 interception, 1 forced fumble, 2 pass deflections, 49 tackles, and 3.5 sacks, like say you got that out of pick A. Pick B, you get 3 interceptions, you get 34 tackles, and you get 9.5 sacks. Get a little bit more production out of the other. Player A was Trayvon Walker. Player B was Aiden Hutchinson this last year.
Yeah.
And a lot of people thought Hutchinson was going to do what we're talking about Will Anderson right now. You're going to get quicker production out of him. Jacksonville was okay playing the long game because they have Trevor Lawrence there, similar to how Arizona has Kyler Murray. Like, Arizona didn't think they'd be here. And I think that's something that Ozenfort's aware of, Gannon's aware of. And I think in free agency, part of me has been really coming around on the idea. I think Murphy can come back. I think Allen might even come back, just so it's not a complete rebuild for a front office. That being said, if you could do that, that's where this pick makes more sense. Is you can lean on Allen while Wilson develops. I think free agency is really going to dictate the direction of this pick, whether or not you look for an immediate impact versus a long-term play. I think that's going to be another discussion down the road. It's funny. I thought this pick was going to be very boring back in January. I was like, man, we're at 3. It's just going to be Jalen Carter, Will Anderson. This is slowly getting to be more and more interesting by the week. And I didn't think it would be.
Oh, no, absolutely. I really like your point about whether or not the Cardinals feel like they're in like a rebuild, or, maybe they're just 1 year away from, getting back to potential playoff contention. Jonathan Gannon, in his opening press conference, spoke. He was asked if he thought the Cardinals were entering a rebuild, and he kind of dodged it a little bit. And something he brought up in his answer was him and Monty Ossenfort, Michael Bidwell were in their interviews before he got hired, right? And he said Monty asked him a question, and then Jonathan Gannon responded with, "I don't know, Monty, what do you think?" And they kind of went back and forth with each other. and they disagreed on the topic, which presumably everybody assumed was whether or not the Cardinals were entering a rebuild, or if they thought they could put a couple Band-Aids over everything, try to make some magical run next year, right? There seems to be a little bit of a disagreement between Gannon and Austin Fort, just in terms of if the Cardinals are going to enter a rebuild. And I think in about 2 weeks, when free agency really gets underway, we're going to find out. And to your point too, what they want to do obviously is going to really dictate the direction they go in. Because if they really think they can get Kyler back before the midseason point and try to make a run, you're probably going to see a couple really strong veteran guys come in here. But if that's not the case, Kyler's coming off a torn ACL. You're going to see almost like a youth movement happen within Arizona, at least in terms of free agency and the guys to bring in. And to kind of counter all that and tie it in together with the number 3 pick, maybe there's not as much pressure to get a Will Anderson Jr. in here right away to get 10.5 sacks in his first season. Maybe you can take a gamble on Tyree Wilson, let him get a year experience under his belt, let him add a little bit more to his game, both physically and, in terms of adding moves to the pass rush arsenal. And maybe you can build something off of that. And I think that's a really kind of interesting dynamic that we're going to see unfold here within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think the combine will play a factor into it. Really, it's the combine, free agency, and then it'll be like, okay, where we're at. Which if you follow football, you're probably listening to this and you're like, well, no, you know what? Like, of course, those things are going to impact it. And I hate it every year because when you talk about prospects, you're like, oh, well, it depends on the landing spot, this and that. I mean, end of the day, time's a flat circle. Everything keeps coming back to where it's supposed to be. But at the same time, this team, like I brought up and you brought up, and as it's been talked about internally as well, like this roster is not bad. They just had one of the and shittiest is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Calendar years I think I've ever seen a team have, outside of maybe what Houston dealt with a year and a half ago. Completely different situation, obviously. This was more on the field stuff, which then just trickled down and made whatever happened with Steve Keim happen, and then made like Cliff Kingsbury. It was a disaster from top to bottom for this team. And it's a team that was in the playoffs a year ago and almost beat Dallas. And it's one of those things where I think it's something that needs to be remembered if you are in that front office and you're a part of that coaching staff. Like, there are pieces here to build with. Yeah, there's a lot of free agents. You got to bring some of them back. And I think the reason I brought up how they might bring back Allen and Murphy is I think you might see those guys are going to see what Brandon Graham was able to get out of his career at his age. Hassan Reddick was able to do, having a career revitalization. Byron Murphy can look at what James Bradbury did, having an all-pro season there in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to hold on the whole way, but you know how that goes. And it's one of those things where he has the resume to bring, like, that defense is key. You talked about Kyler coming back and being healthy. I don't know what that's going to be like, and I don't want them to rush it. And there's been a lot of discussions how, like I saw today, I think it was today, Bidwell said, Kyler's young, he'll bounce back.
Yeah.
And that's very true. But Kyler also took a very unique route in rehabbing the ACL, then doing the surgery, kind of did the Logan Paul way. Though I don't think Kyler Murray's going to Columbia and getting any special treatment that is not NFL approved. But the point is, he is young. He might be ready if he's ready by October, I think that's 1 month of the season gone. Obviously, we don't know their schedule for the first month. But if you come out of that 2-2, 1-4, and you get that offense going, have a little bit of growing pains in September to get stuff figured out plus through the preseason, whether it's Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson, I think this team's not far off, is my point.
I absolutely agree. The pieces are there, and that even plays into like what they do at DeAndre Hopkins, right? Because if they really believe they are not super far away from contending, it's going to be tough to move D-Hop for the right compensation as is, right? He's going to be, I think, 31 at the beginning of the season. He has the second highest cap hit next year under Tyree for receivers. There's a lot that a team would have to jump in terms of hurdles in order to make sure DeAndre Hopkins can play football for the team next year. If they want to try to hit this rebuild, a team should try to hit a rebuild and try to squeeze the most compensation out of DeAndre Hopkins, absolutely go for it. But then again, just like we talked about, if they really think they're at max 2 years away from being a playoff team again, I don't see a point in not bringing back DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, it's all hearsay. We won't really know until I think the combine, like you said, is when we'll start to get a little bit of a feel of where the Cardinals are going to be at in the process. Moving on, though, kind of continuing on the Tyree Wilson train, you wrote a phenomenal article for allcardinals.com on Tyree Wilson, how he's a potential guy to watch for number 3, who went to the pros, you went into the cons, just in terms of what Wilson can possibly be. These are the pros right here listed from your articles. He said, size to dominate, plays with an edge, and can play with hand in dirt or standing upright. And I think that's maybe an underrated aspect, because when Jonathan Gannon spoke with us, he said that his defense doesn't really have a base defense. He doesn't really have one solidified game plan on a week-to-week basis. It changes. It changes depending on the opponent. Everything is fluid, right? And I'm almost like Bruce Lee, be like water, right? Kind of bend and shift to what you need to be. I think the ability to either kind of play with a hand in the dirt as maybe like a 4-3 edge, or maybe as like a 3-4 outside linebacker, depending on what you need him to be in the defense. I think the ability to do both is extremely underrated, especially in today's game where a lot of base defenses are basically nickel packages.
Yeah, and that's something that I really liked about him, seeing it where, like, Texas Tech, I don't really think they had a base too much going on, to where it was kind of like, okay, we're just going to – it's Big 12 defense. Like, just kind of do something and throw something at the wall and see what sticks. That was my first thought. My second thought is I love that Bruce Lee quote, because ironically, that was actually my senior quote in high school.
Hell yeah.
So which the person creating the yearbook told me was a horrible, stupid quote, but
look at them now.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly where they're at right now, and it's at another very fun job. So, haha. Point is, though, with Wilson, that ability and the versatility you have, like, I've been writing that down with a lot of prospects this year, is position versatility. It could be for running backs, wide receivers, offensive linemen. A lot of like tackles, I think, could move inside this year if they wanted to. And there's been a lot of edge guys that have the ability to either stand up and or have their hand down in the dirt. I will say with Wilson, I don't want him playing any sort of pass coverage if he's standing up. Like, I don't want him dropping back a ton right now. That's something that made, who we talked about earlier, Aiden Hutchinson, so special last year, was his ability to really provide solid zone coverage if needed. Wilson, I'm not banking on that, but I think he could be someone that, like, you just constantly throw at pass rushing reps with, and then let his size, like what J.J. Watt just did this past year through his whole career, just swatting balls at the line, let him kind of provide help that way. But that being said, too, like, if you need somebody to kind of spy on a running back out in the flats, I think Wilson can handle that. I don't think that's too tough of a job to ask for him right now. And again, that versatility is just more ways to help out a defense and everyone else around him, kind of be able to make plays or free up jobs or responsibilities for him.
Now, let me ask you this, because we've talked a little bit how Wilson, at least compared to Will Anderson, is more of that like developmental kind of guy. You already have two, and granted, not really comparable, just in terms of prospects coming out, but you already have Myjai Sanders and Cam Thomas on the roster. Both didn't play a whole lot last year, but I feel like both flashed a little bit of what they could do. I don't think either of them are perennial starters moving forward, but there's certainly some potential there, right? It's certainly something there to maybe keep them as, at worst, a rotational guy and heading into next year.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say is so many of I froze. We good?
Yeah, good.
Okay. So like we talked about with the offensive lines for those two Super Bowl teams, other side of the ball, the defensive lines, like Philly had a rotation of guys. Like they had Sue, they had Robert Quinn, they had Brandon Graham, they had Hassan Riddick. Like that rotation was keeping everyone fresh. And that's something where adding another edge to Sanders and Cam Thomas, those are the guys that are going to give the starters a rep or two off just to kind of catch their breath, scheme a little bit on the sideline, then head back in there. And that's a fine role to have. I just don't want them to be plug and played for a whole season because when they came out, I wasn't too impressed with them. I like Thomas more than I did Sanders. I think Sanders really benefited from the level of play he had in the competition in the AAC. And then with Thomas, kind of the same thing. Thomas I like more because of the length he possesses. But again, rotation's perfect for them. And I think that's something where keep them, add starters in Zach Allen, bring him back, get Tyree Wilson in this case, and you're fine. Like that solves one whole position group on the defense from day one. And if you sign Byron Murphy back and you got Marco Wilson, geez, and you have Budda Baker at safety, you've got Isaiah Simmons potentially finally figuring things out at linebacker, you have defense solved. And you can just focus on the offense. Like, and the offense with Kyler should be fine. Like, just to bring everything back, this team's not far off. And it's got the role players. Now you need the stars and the starters. And I think Wilson would be okay with that current group of edge players and defensive linemen to where he can be in the blend there and be productive at the same time. Just might have to be patient a little bit.
Absolutely. Kind of putting a bow on this, I do want to get your opinion because at least in this mock draft, and obviously the Bears are not favored to stay at number one. You know, time will tell who will eventually move up, jump and go get what everybody assumes to be Bryce Young. I'm not buying the Anthony Richardson hype at number one, by the way. I don't think that's going to happen.
I'll tell you what, I'm buying into it a tiny bit, but that's a different discussion. That doesn't really.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? We'll throw it out the window. Right. Assuming a quarterback goes number one, in real life, let's say Jalen Carter goes number two, and you have Will Anderson and maybe Tyree Wilson for you at number three. You have the Indianapolis Colts at number four, right?
Yep.
And then you have the Seattle Seahawks at number five. Are you going to try to trade back with Indy at number four? Or are they kind of knowing they're going to get a quarterback? Are they going to play a game of chicken knowing that the Cardinals aren't going to take their guy?
So what I would hope would happen in this case, now I was pulling up the mock, so I wanted to say I can't remember after Seattle what the rest of the top 10 is because there's just too much going on in my head as I can't even say Marco Wilson right today. I think if you're Arizona, like in his mock, he has Las Vegas getting Will Levis. Teams between Arizona and Indianapolis between Arizona and Las Vegas, only team that needs a quarterback there is Indianapolis. And in this mock, you have CJ Stroud there and Will Levis. If I'm Las Vegas and this plays out to where number three is whoever it's going to be after Young and Carter, Arizona in theory could trade back to 7 and like Will Anderson probably still goes to Seattle. Detroit may take Tyree Wilson or Miles Murphy, but then it goes from having either what we initially thought of Will Anderson and Jalen Carter to you either have Miles Murphy out of Clemson or Tyree Wilson. Both are kind of in the same mold where they're kind of really projects. But that being said, a team moving up from 7 to 3 for a quarterback, you're probably looking at a 2024 first-round pick from a Raiders team, which isn't that good and is also in a loaded division. So they're probably going to have a very high pick next year. So that's something where I think Osen Fort has the potential to be looking at the bigger picture here. And again, if you're really wanting Wilson, that's telling me you're okay with waiting on winning at least a year. Trade back. call Mark Davis and be like, hey, look, do you need another bowl to cut your haircut? Do you need some extra UFC ringside seats? I know you're at the boxing matches. I got ringside to David Benavidez, Caleb Plant at the end of March. Like, there's different possibilities here. And there's other teams, obviously, in the top 10 that need quarterbacks, Atlanta, Carolina right after that. But I think Raiders could be the sweet spot where you could jump Indianapolis, and then that way both teams kind of get their quarterback. And just to even further complicate this with no visual to keep people watching this to see what I'm talking about, I think Indianapolis ultimately moves up to 1. So in that case, you have Indianapolis 1, Houston 2. That's quarterback. 3 would be Arizona. But then if you look back, number 4 is Chicago. And then you have Seattle, Detroit, Las Vegas. Vegas may not be adept to trading at that point. So again, Cardinals fans probably need to root for the Bears to kind of stay pat, which will then just create the more rush for and the value for that number 3 pick. If the Colts trade up, that's where I think they stay pat at 3, take whoever they're comfortable with. If the Bears make a pick and they obviously aren't going to, I don't think they're going to go quarterback. That's where Cardinals can then take advantage.
Do you think Wilson at number 3 would be a reach?
I hadn't really dove in on Wilson a whole lot till this mock, and then for this, obviously. I think after free agency, I could give you a solid answer. Let's say, as it stands right now, a little bit, but it's not a reach that has me burning anything at this point. Like, I'm not going full crazy over it. It would just kind of be one of those like, oh. And like I talked about in the mock, or not the mock, in my article, Houston fans booed J.J. Watt when he was drafted. They wanted Robert Quinn, who was supposed to be the number 1 pick that year out of North Carolina. That was the year they had that crazy defensive line with Robert Quinn and Marvin Austin, if you can remember that name. And Robert Quinn was like the physical freak, this and that. J.J. Watt was this tight end converted to edge rusher who just went to Wisconsin to be at his home college. And you're like, oh, well, maybe he'll turn into something. And I think Houston had a very good pick in that now, as you can see. And Cardinals fans got a taste of it. But that being said, Robert Quinn wasn't a bad pick either. So he had he's still playing, has had a very good career. I think either one of those career arcs you'd be more than happy with if you're going to compare the Wilson and Will Anderson situation.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, the term reach is kind of thrown out a lot. I feel like it's just in terms of where guys are taken in the draft, but like years down the road, if you get a good guy, you get a good guy, right? I mean, like regardless of like where you take him, and dude, as we've learned from covering football for just now the handful of years that we've actually really been following it and covering it, for hard-earned American monies, it takes one team. It takes one team to fall in love with a guy and to really throw an entire mock draft away with one pick. Would that be the Cardinals under new management, under new general manager Monty Ossenfort, maybe looking to make a statement, maybe looking to make a splash? I don't know. I'm still very much on the Carter or the Anderson train. If they want to move back and potentially get a guy, like Reese or Wilson, sure, as long as you get good compensation for it. But I think at the end of the day, if they were to walk away with Wilson, Cardinals fans shouldn't be crazy upset, especially if Arizona is committing to that rebuild in 2023, despite raising season ticket prices. I don't know if you saw that, Andrew. They raised season ticket prices by a pretty decent percentage for some people. And it's just kind of evident that like the 4-13 product in the field probably isn't going to get a whole lot better. And a lot of people were pissed over that.
Yeah, that's always a fun thing. I'm a big combat sports fan, and the UFC has been doing that where if it's a pay-per-view event, the tickets are asinine. And that being said, their roster, like they have events every weekend now. So like a pay-per-view card used to be loaded, and now it's really just you've got one or two fights you really look forward to, but the prices have gone up. Yeah, that's usually not very good for sports fans. And like, no. And I'm not getting into a whole thing. Like, now is not the time to be raising the price on bad products. Just the current landscape of 2023 just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But yeah, I'm sure he's really hurting for money.
Thoughts and prayers to the people in the season ticket office having to send those emails out and make the phone calls.
I have a buddy that works for the Pirates season ticket office.
Ooh, dude.
Dude, every time I get a call, because my name's in there, or like they would stop in at my work when I worked retail. Oh, you going to buy tickets? I was like, is Bob Nutting still signing your checks? And they're like, yeah.
You and 40,000 other people.
I was like, I'm not giving that man another dime of money.
Yep.
As long as he owns that team. So, nope, I get it. Bad owners are so fun. And I don't think Bidwell's a bad owner. I just think he can be a little full of himself at times. And kind of
he seems to be a little more hands-off than he was in the past,
yes,
to his credit.
I think it's just one of those things where he knows his family name carries weight in the NFL. And I think that makes him think he's immune to any criticism. And that's obviously not the case. But I think that's something that is probably lurking in the back of his head. It's like, oh, well. And I'm sure he's hurting for money because they just hosted the Super Bowl. So I'm sure the NFL didn't give him a kickback for that either. If he really wants to get some money, he could pull, Stephen Ross, who owns the Dolphins. You could host an F1 race and you get like a $250 million stipend.
Interesting.
I think they said Stephen Ross made more money off of hosting an F1 race than he did the Super Bowl.
That's something. That's something. Go. All right, Andrew, any parting thoughts on Tyree Wilson potentially becoming a Cardinal?
Be open to it. Like I've been saying everything. A couple weeks ago, it was Broderick Jones. Now we got Tyree Wilson. Next week, I'm sure we'll be talking about Will Levis at number 3 at this point. So,
and you know what? If our boy Daniel Jeremiah was indeed to point that out, we'd be more than happy to talk about it here on the All Cardinals podcast. Go and follow Andrew Harbaugh at Andrew Harbaugh.
We're gonna have a problem.
I think we would broadcast live from the protest outside of the Cardinals stadium. And
I would get a ticket and be out there in a heartbeat.
I had a nice little meet and greet with a lot of subscribers. It'd be phenomenal.
Yep.
But follow Andrew Harbaugh at Andrew Harbaugh _ Follow me at Donnie Druin. Go to comment, like, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're almost at 500 subscribers. Woo! Hoping to bring you guys some really solid stuff from Indianapolis next week. But until then, my name is Donnie Druin. His name is Andrew Harbaugh. We'll see you next time on the All Cardinals Draft Podcast.